When my parents announced they were going out of town, I was thrilled. The house would be ours, and my two best friends, Jake and Ryan, were coming over for a sleepover. My parents are wealthy, and our house is huge, with long hallways, big rooms, and a sprawling backyard. We had so many plans for the night: video games, movies, and staying up late. Little did we know, this night would be anything but ordinary. The evening started off great. We played outside until the sun began to set. We were laughing and chasing each other when we first heard it. A faint, almost rhythmic, thumping sound. We brushed it off as the house settling, or maybe some animal rustling in the bushes. But the sounds continued, growing louder and more frequent. The air felt colder, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. We decided to go back inside. The house, which was usually a place of comfort, now felt oddly unfamiliar and foreboding. We turned on all the lights, but the sense of unease lingered. We tried to distract ourselves with video games, but the strange noises persisted. There was a scraping sound, like something sharp dragging against the walls. We checked every room, finding nothing. The tension in the air was thick, making it hard to breathe. Eventually, we went upstairs to my room, thinking we would be safer together. As we sat on my bed, the sounds seemed to follow us. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. A tapping sound came from the window. I mustered the courage to look outside. My heart was pounding. There, standing by the tree line, was a tall, dark figure. He was unnaturally tall, his silhouette stark against the dim light of the moon. He seemed to be watching us. Panic set in. We barricaded the door with whatever furniture we could find, hoping to keep whatever was out there at bay. But the sounds only grew louder, more insistent. We huddled together, whispering reassurances we didn't believe. The house, so large and empty, seemed to amplify every noise, turning the once familiar into something sinister. We heard footsteps in the hallway. They were slow and deliberate. The door handle rattled, and we held our breath, waiting for whatever was on the other side to reveal itself. And then, as suddenly as it started, the noises stopped. Silence filled the house, heavy and suffocating. We waited, too scared to move or speak. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and we fell into a fitful sleep. We woke up, and it all seemed normal. We ventured downstairs. Everything seemed in place, no sign of the previous night's terror. As we tried to make sense of it, I noticed something on the kitchen table, an old photograph. It was a family photo, yellowed with age, showing a man, tall and imposing, standing behind a young boy who looked just like me. On the back, in faded ink, was a date from decades ago and a single word: remember. I was excited to spend the night at my friend Joe's house. It had been a long time since we had a sleepover, and I looked forward to staying up late, playing video games, and just having fun. Joe's house was in a quiet neighborhood. We settled into his basement and started to play our favorite video games. Time seemed to fly by, and before we knew it, it was well past midnight. Suddenly, I thought I heard something outside. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. I shrugged it off, because I needed to focus on the game, but then I heard it again. This time, it was louder, like something heavy being dragged across the ground. I glanced at Joe, but it seems like he didn't hear it. He was focused on the game. I knew something was wrong. The noise continued, hearing it even louder now. I couldn't ignore it anymore. My curiosity got the better of me, and I paused the game. Joe finally noticed and looked at me questioningly. He didn't know what was going on, but I gave him a signal for him to listen. The scraping sound was now unmistakable, coming from outside the basement window. I looked over the window. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest. The night outside was pitch black, and it was so silent. But suddenly I saw something really weird and creepy. A tall, dark figure was slowly making its way toward the house. He moved with an unnatural slowness, like he isn't a real human being. It was so scary. You could barely notice him in those shadows. I felt a chill run down my spine as I watched him approach. Slowly, but without a doubt, he was near us. I moved away from the window. My mind was playing tricks with me. Who was this man? Why was he here? I tried to come to conclusion. Maybe it was just a neighbor or someone lost. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The man's movements were too unnatural. As I backed away, I tripped over a pile of Joe's clothes and fell to the floor. The noise must have caught Joe's attention because he finally came over to see what was going on. I pointed to the window. My hands were trembling. He looked out and froze, his face draining of color. The man was now at the edge of the yard, just a few feet from the house. He stood still, almost as if he were studying the place, deciding his next move. I could feel the terror building inside me, something that made me hard to breathe. Those weird sounds continued. Joe and I stared at each other, our fear mirrored in each other's eyes. We knew we had to do something, but we were paralyzed by the unknown threat lurking outside. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest object, some heavy metal lamp, and told for Joe to follow me. We went downstairs as quietly as possible, walking as slowly as we could so that creature doesn't hear us. We reached the main floor and made our way to the front door. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock, finally managing to turn it. We burst out into the night, but the man was gone. Everything was empty, the yard, the streets. It's like he suddenly vanished. Joe and I stood there, gasping for breath. We never saw the man again, but the memory of that night stayed with me. When I went to my cousin Tim's house for the weekend, I thought it would be fun. Tim and I always had a great time together. His house was bigger than ours, with lots of rooms to explore and a big backyard to play in. That night, we decided to watch some movies in the living room. We turned off all the lights, making the room dark except for the glow of the TV. At some point, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I thought it was because of the movie, but then I realized the sound wasn't coming from the TV. It was coming from inside the house. I gently pushed Tim, and we both listened carefully. We could hear soft footsteps. Someone was moving around in the house, and it wasn't his parents. They had gone out for the night. Our eyes met, wide with fear. We both knew we had no other option but to hide. We crawled off the couch and slipped behind it, trying to make as little noise as possible. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure the intruders would hear it. From our hiding spot, we could see two figures moving through the living room. They weren't in a hurry, which made it even scarier. They were careful, as if they knew the house well. I watched one of them approach the TV and start unplugging it, while the other searched through the drawers in the cabinet. I tried to remember where my phone was, but then I remembered it was on the kitchen table, charging. There was no way I could reach it without being seen. They moved from room to room, taking more stuff as they went. I heard them upstairs in Tim's parents' bedroom, opening drawers and closets. Eventually, they came back downstairs, carrying bags full of what they had taken. They didn't speak to each other, just moved towards the door. Tim and I stayed hidden for what felt like an eternity before we finally got out from behind the couch. We checked the house, making sure they were really gone. The rooms were a mess, drawers left open, and things missing. We found our phones and called Tim's parents, who rushed home and called the police. The police investigation revealed the shocking truth. The burglars were actually former neighbors who had moved away a few months ago. They had been watching the house, knowing Tim's parents' routines, and when the house would be empty. They took advantage of that knowledge, planning their break-in.